welcome to this short overview of the Theatre of Peace programmes. This is really designed for those people who are engaged in the sustained programmes, coaching programmes, and for the peace ambassadors in the businesses at schools and universities that we're working with. However, it also can be used as an introduction to the programmes for those people who are about to start a programme or are interested in booking one. So there are 4 programmes, keynotes, training days and workshops, 24-hour retreats, leadership and team coaching, and our 3-month change programmes. All the elements and the core elements I'm going to share with you here are just an introduction to the underlying theory and the component parts. It's not a detailed explanation, but it is an introduction to the elements that support peace building, peacekeeping and peacemaking in our businesses, schools and communities. Back in the 1980s, Margaret Wheatley wrote this extraordinary book, Leadership and the New Science, and it made a massive impact on me and my work. At the time, I was working and qualified as an actor at Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, and I had been moved by the link between creativity and the unseen experiences within performance, but also the emerging realization that the science and the art are interconnected. And what Margaret said then, and I think is even more relevant now in terms of our peace work, is the importance of dealing with the current chaos. And Margaret said, whatever your personal beliefs and experiences, I invite you to consider that we need a new worldview to navigate this chaotic time. We cannot hope to make sense using our old maps. We won't help to dust them off or reprint them in bold colours. The more we rely on them, the more disorientated we become. They cause us to focus on the wrong things and blind us to what's significant. Using them, we will journey only to greater chaos. And I think the focus of what is significant now, and what is significant now both in our businesses, our schools, our communities, is finding a means of understanding the causes for conflict and violence, and how we, in our daily life, can do something about moving from a culture of conflict to a culture of peace. Johan Galton, who sadly died in February of this year, 2024, says that violence is present when human beings are being influenced so that their actual somatic and mental realizations are below their potential realizations. And by that, in more simple language, it's whether or not the material, the physical needs and the mental, emotional needs of individuals are able to thrive in the businesses, in the schools, in our communities, and whether or not the institutions and the cultures around them can enable this, or they suppress this, which is, by his definition, the definition of other peace scholars, an act of violence. And so that's what we're going to explore. That really is the basis of understanding what violence is and how we can approach it. So Johan Galton came up with this rather wonderful and simple but powerful framework to understand how to transform conflict, because every interaction and every element of change is conflict centered, and it's not about avoiding conflict, it's about using it constructively, because if we don't, with awareness, engage in conflict constructively, it can become destructive. If it's constructive, it can lead to peace. If it's destructive, it can lead to violence. And that violence can be direct violence, such as physical and verbal violence, or it can be indirect violence in terms of the structures, the institutional structures that we have, the hierarchies within them, or the culture, the unseen rules that every institution, every business, every school, every community has, and understanding how the culture contributes to the peace or the conflict. And the peace can be positive peace, which leads to social justice, but it can also be negative peace. And negative peace, according to Galton, is whilst it may be the absence of direct violence, physical or verbal, it is not the absence of the structural and cultural. And in many businesses, schools and communities, it is this negative piece that really creates the conditions for more severe conflicts and violence. And that's really the work that we at Undiscovered Country are exploring and have explored for the past few decades. Coming from an arts background, we use creativity, creative experiences, storytelling, oracy, and the like to have an experiential approach to our work. But it is rooted in very good research. And Ian Foster, in his book Howard's End, says, "Only connect the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted. And human love will be seen at its highest. Live in fragments no longer." And this has been a mantra for me for decades. And the prose, if you like, represents the structure and the scene and the verbal, and the passion is the art, the unseen. And creativity, conflict has a huge power to be creative if approached balancing the rational and the intuitive. And the work that we do, whether or not it's the workshops or introductions to our work, it's all rooted in this dynamic between the rational and intuitive, which has been also at the heart of my research at Cambridge University. So whilst this isn't a lecture, this is really an introduction, but we do have scholars and peace scholars that I'm working with in universities globally. And for those of them who are taking part in the 5 dialogue lectures, this is, again, a summary for them. So some of them will want to dig a bit deeper. But at its simplest, it's whether or not we can deal with the conflict that arise. And there are 2 key resources that underpin our work. And it's looking at the conflict and the connection between the East. And so I draw from Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism and Taoism. I'm an instructor in Tai Chi, and I've been practicing Buddhism for about 40 years, and the West. And this is, I've been involved in positive psychology for about 30 years. So the East, we have Tian Tai, 6th century Chinese philosopher Buddhist. And in the West, we have Dr. Clare W. Graves. And Clare Graves was a great friend and colleague of Abraham Maslow. And the framework that I will just touch on of Graves is very much similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But what I was interested in, and have been, is this concept in Tian Tai called 3,000 worlds in a moment of time, or Ichinen Sanzen, if to give its term. And it's the science of and the mathematics of what it is to be present. And this has been a fascinating research for me, and the application and how it links to the emergent cyclical levels of existence theory. And it is my understanding, having spoken to the students of Clare Graves and been trained by students of Graves, who came up with this idea in the late 50s and 60s. And this was a time where what Eastern ideas were influencing Western culture, and the one particular element of the 3,000 worlds is the levels of human existence, the 10 worlds that Clare Graves transformed into a framework for Western culture. So that really underpins our work. And again, I'm not going to give a big lecture on these now, but I just wanted to state this is the foundation for our research, mine in particular. So the Western approach is, which could be argued as more rational, and then the East is more transrational. Transrational is to go beyond the rational. It's not to exclude the rational, but it's to take the rational structures that we all need, but then moving to this next level. And it's using a phrase that Ken Wilber and others uses, to transcend but include. And that creates reality. That's that the link between the seen and the unseen, the rational and the transrational. So when we work, all of that underlying complexity is simplified in this very simple cycle of change, which can be looked through 4 lenses, and I'll touch on those in this very short presentation. But at its simplest, when we work with communities, they're not that interested in the underlying research, although they want to know it's there. They want something they can practically use. So our practical process is we clarify purpose, we understand our roles, responsibilities and reward relating to that purpose and our values that connect us, and then we come up with a plan, and then we act upon it, and then we evaluate it. And that is it, really. That very simple process, but we know that in terms of our research, that each of those stages require a different mindset and a different leadership style. And this is for us is why this iterative process of going round this simple process with feedback is really the basis for peace building, peacekeeping and peacemaking. You'll notice, for those of you who have like an acronym, it's the pupa process because it's all about change. So Dasaku Ikeda, Buddhist philosopher who also sadly died at the end of 2023, says of 3,000 Worlds in a Moment of Time that it's perhaps the most accurate depiction of the complexity of human nature and human reality in the history of philosophy. And to fully understand what it means to be human, the driving question of wisdom-based education, we require a model based on Ichinen and Sanzen that helps us determine our place in the chain of being. And so what I've been doing over the past 40 years, I'm very old, is to take this idea of wisdom-based and put it within the context which is accessible, understandable and applicable, whether or not you're in an Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, rational, transrational, and just look for the point of connection. But for that to happen, we have to look at, according to Da Vinci, we need to be able to grasp the art, the intuitive, creative, and the science, the rational, the structural, the graspable. And that is our challenge. So when we get the science and the art as our conflict, we develop creativity. And the model for this, it's called the butterfly model, again, pupa process, see the link. It embraces these two, but it's often contradictory forces to create balance and dynamic growth for individuals, institutions and communities. And we use serious play that recognises and integrates science and art at every stage of the design, the delivery and the assessment. And it is this balance between the playful and the rational that makes this work. Because that's for the simple reason, as human beings, we have an innate desire for story, for play, for connection. And we also have a huge drive for looking at why we're here and how we can be of a great impact in the world. So my training, as I say, is in theatre. I trained both in the Western and Eastern styles. Western style, I trained as a classical actor at the Orbit School for a few years, but I also trained in Japan as a physical theatre performer with Tadashi Suzuki that incorporated epic like Greek and Shakespeare explored through the lens and of no theatre and kabuki. And so I've been using experience-based, and within Undiscovered Country we use a vehicle for developing peace, education and culture is the arts. And there is a reason for this. To quote Wolfgang Dietrich, who's one of the leaders in peace scholars in the world, says, "No art form, to my knowledge, explores the human condition as thoroughly as theatre. None calls so wholeheartedly for human relationships to be fulfilled. None is such a fruitful place for self-creation, and no art changes more." And again, I'm not going to go into any great theory of how this works, but it does. And when we experience theatre at its best, or even theatre at its worst, actually, it like other experiences of music and art and dance, we can create this moment of enlightenment, not enlightenment in the particularly Buddhist sense, but to be enlightened, to see more clearly. And these are the values. So you'll see that we introduce the values that shape the character of a peace builder or peace ambassador or a leader. And that links into the pupil process. So if you want to clarify your purpose, you need bravery. If you want to understand your roles, responsibilities, and your impact on other people, you need to understand your energy. If you want to come up with a plan, it has to be adaptive, creative, and to evaluate it, to be open, to be motivated to keep on going when things don't go the way you plan. So, developing these competencies of bravery, energy, creativity, openness, and motivation will, as a consequence, develop a state of awareness or enlightenment. And again, you'll see the acronym there, BECOME. And I know how much people love an acronym. So how do we become more human? How do we become enlightened? Well, we do it by being brave, energetic, creative, open, and motivated. So let's return to Galtung's theory. And there are three forms of violence: the direct, the structural, the cultural, and the positive and negative piece. Negative, absence of direct violence; positive, absence of structural and cultural violence. And the three ways of bringing about peace, which is really what I want to move on in this short introduction to the vocabulary of peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building. And again, as you would expect, this is evidence-based, and everything that I share with you is underpinned by research. But this isn't a formal academic lecture. This is just a summary and introduction to the core elements that we use. So Tiantai, in terms of his model of 3,000 worlds in a moment of time, the mathematics of that is made up of the three realms, timed by the 10 factors that shape character, and the 10 worlds that Graves utilised. But in the 10 worlds, each world is linked to each world. So that's where you get your 3,000. 3 realms times 10 factors times 10 worlds times 10 worlds. So that's the 3,000. And the 3 realms are self, others, and the environment. And peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building looks different for self, others, and environments at each of those levels, because they demand different levels of awareness, different levels of enlightenment, different levels of complexity. So using a systems transformation approach, simple systems, energy in, energy out, a simple pulley system would be an example of that. And so peacekeeping is basically, here are the rules, let's agree the rules, let's not break the rules. And if everyone manages that, then that's fine. However, sometimes the rules are broken. Sometimes the process doesn't work. So therefore you need to move to the peacemaking, which requires, is a bit more complicated. And this requires a restorative approach, people chatting with each other, people being more emotionally aware and being more enterprising, innovative. And most organisations work at these, most schools, most businesses work at these rules, and what do we do when we have the rules and break down? However, in terms of peace building and in terms of creating a culture of peace, we have to embrace the chaotic. And the chaotic isn't, and people don't like the word chaotic, but chaotic from a science point of view means order, but without predictability. So we transcend and include. We're not just jumping into a chaotic. The programs and the processes, the coaching processes, the training processes always start with very clear, simple programs that people understand their role, how it relates to others, how it relates to environment. And then we bring in the complicated, the skills, social coaching, the restorative approaches, in order to move into having that as a sound foundation for dealing with cultural change. And if we get that right, we move to complex, adaptive, or self-organizing systems. And for those of you who've ever been in a situation where spontaneity happens and spontaneity required, it's a fantastic place to be. But it's not there all the time. We have to start with the simple, move to the complicated, embrace the chaotic if we're ever going to get to utilize the complex. And so, and again, I'm just going to quickly go through the 10 levels. Again, I'm not going to explain them in any great detail. Some of you will have recognized the levels I'm going to share with you, especially if you've been used profiling tools, Maslow's, but particularly spiral dynamics and management drives and insight profiling tools. But the simple, if we, to the left is Graves' term and to the right is Chen Tai's. So the basic survival, or Chen Tai would say this was hell. It is really looking at the basic needs. Tribal, which is driven by a hunger to be part of, a hunger to be seen and engaged. Self, which is a development of tribal, but it's also very animalistic. And order, and Chen Tai calls this anger, frustration of not having things go as you plan. So these 4 basic levels of survival, tribal, self-order, or hell, hunger, animality, and anger are the essence of a simple system. And if you get the basic survival needs right, and you get the team right, and everyone knows what they're doing, and they have a plan, absolutely fine. And the negative aspect of these is that if you don't get survival right, it's a hell of a place to work. If the tribe isn't good, it's constantly berating and excluding people. If you don't get the self right, you're an organisation full of animality and egos. And if you don't sustain and have clear structures that are held by everyone, you generate the anger. Again, I'm going to resist the temptation of giving the explanation in any more detail than that, because as I say, for those of you who are coming on the programs, this is more generating more questions than answers, and for those of you who have been on the programs, it's just a gentle reminder. So as we move into the complicated, we transcend and include, and as we go up, it's important to realise that the further we evolve, it sheds a greater light on the levels that we've just been through. So we deepen our understanding of survival, tribal, self, and order when we move to the next level of maturity, of enterprise, of innovation, and this can create a state of rapture. And then if we build off our enterprise, income generation, wealth creation, and the creativity of the new, then we can feed it into the next stage of community. And Chen Tai says when we have community that is based on healthy survival, tribal self-order and enterprise, it creates tranquility and harmony beyond the tribe, beyond the groups. And community experience is transformational, as anyone who ever goes to the theatre or dance or a festival knows. The power of being in community with people is extraordinary. And then this leads to the next level, which is interconnected and seeing how all of this works, wanting to know what just happened there. And Chen Tai calls this a stage of learning. So if we're going to move into the complicated and the peacemaking, we have to have a deeper understanding of each of these 7 levels. And Graves then said we have the 8th, which is interdependent. This is also in the 1980s, and there was a big move in understanding our relationship with the world and the Gaia principle, James Lovelock. And this, from a teaching and learning point of view, when we go through the state of learning, we have this moment of realization. And we go, oh my gosh, I now get it. The next stage is taking that awareness and putting it into place. And this is crucial to the leadership and the change and the peace work. Graves only went up to interdependent. So what I've done, I've added the next stage, and I've use this term warrior, and you'll see why when we look at the profiling tools. Chen Tai called this the bodhisattva. It can also be translated as a servant leader or the teacher, but it's the person who's done the learning, has a point of understanding, and gets on with the job. And this is very different. If you look at these as leadership styles, we have our survival leader, our tribal leader, our self-leader, order, enterprise, community, interconnected, interdependent leader. And we have an emerging number of those people in our businesses who are just getting on with the job. And this is very interesting because the Bodhisattva doesn't seek attention, doesn't seek to be the center of things, but they have a job and they get on with it. And this is very different from a more 1980s traditional image of the leader as ego-driven and power. They're not. Real leadership that transforms over time are people that have the balance between knowledge and action, and they can be warrior-like and they can challenge, but it's not ego-driven. And then if we get to the final stage, it's the levels of being a fully formed human. And again, that's what a Buddha is in Buddhism. It's not a mystical being, it's a human being that attained the state or the stage of fully formed human. And that's the difference between a state of being, which we can find ourselves in any of these 10 levels at any moment, based upon our relationship between self, others, and environment. Hence, Tiantai's understanding that each world is within each world, but to create a stage of it, to say, okay, I need to focus on my learning, or I need to focus on my community, or I need to focus on the tribe. That requires a simple system and the ability to engage consciously with the reality of what it is to be in this place at this time with these people. So come back to our simple circle. This is about the factors that create the character of the peace builder. And the basic factors are: we need to be present, we need to be kind, we need to be the change, and we need to believe the evidence that is actually being revealed to us, rather than holding on to opinion and not having the ability to change our mind. And I think it was Jules Holland that said, change your mind, prove you've got one. And again, you'll see how the need for consistency within this is at the heart of it. And you'll also see that it links into the peace process of the pupa process, and you'll see it links into the values of bravery and energy and creativity. So you can approach the change, or you can approach peace through the doorway of the practical pupa process, or you can through the values approach, or you can approach it through the emotional creative approach of the factors. Now, how this links in with Tiantai, and again, this is more for my students who are part of my peace program, particularly my colleagues and students in Japan. The 10 factors that link into the present, according to Tiantai, is the 10 factors: appearance, what you see; nature, what you don't see; entity, which is the composition of the appearance and nature; and the power that comes from those appearance, nature, and entity, the potential strength or energy in life to achieve something. So when we're present and when we do our work, and again, workshops and our coaching, we look at the physical state, the unseen, the psychological, and how that links into what we bring into the room as a leader, and what we bring into the room as a pupil, particularly the work that we're doing on peace work in our schools. And it's much easier to explore appearance, nature, entity, and power through games and play and theatre than it is through an academic approach. You should reflect upon it, but if you're going to have the experience of it, that's where theatre comes into its own. So be kind. When we're kind, we're aware of our influence, again, our influence on self, others, and the environment. And an action movement produced when the power is activated. And when we engage in the change, we develop the sixth and seventh factors, the internal cause, so the possibilities inherent in our life, and the habitual tendencies we've created, because we create our habits and our habits create us. So the programs that we run are really about being conscious of the habits we've got and conscious about the habits we're creating. It is that simple. But those habits, we need to become aware of them first, and then aware of the habits we want to create. And that's where the coaching and that's where the sustained programs really come into their own. And relation is our interaction and impact with others and the world. So when we change, everything changes. And Paul Dix has written a fantastic book called When the Adults Change. And we will see this simple reality that if one individual within a group makes a conscious change within themselves, that will impact the rest of the group, positively or negatively, but we cannot escape this very simple connection between ourselves and others and the environment. And then to believe the evidence, we have to be open to the idea of recognizing that that process of transformation is taking place. The moment we begin to engage in change and peace building, there is a latent effect. This is a result produced simultaneously in the depths of our lives when we say, enough, this is what I'm going to do. And there is a whole load of neurology, psychology, and social science around this, particularly Ian McGilchrist's extraordinary work on the divided brain. And that will lead to a manifest effect. At some point, you will see the impact of your actions. This is a visible external result, which eventually appears over time. And that could be within an individual, as simple as the habits of exercise and food, but also within a culture. The consequences of our collective action, whether or not it's leading to a culture of peace or violence. And unless we stem and have an understanding of this pattern, we'll never be able to break it. And we'll find, as we see, sadly, in our conflicts that are going on at this time, you can see the patterns that of violence repeating themselves again and again and again and again. But at some point, those will have to change, and they will change when the leaders have the compassion, the courage, the energy and the wisdom to say enough. But that requires us to move into a level of chaotic and self-organizing. And most institutions, most cultures don't. They stick at the simple and the complicated. And finally, the consistency, being consistent. All of these, again, although it's a simple linear line, the reality is they're all moving at different levels in different times. And so you need to, it's a bit messier than it looks there. So you need to be consistent from beginning to end. And in our coaching, we have a very simple model of clarifying, what is your focus going to be? What do you need to keep that's working? What do you need to develop that's evolving? And what do you need to let go of? And that simple checking in with each other, checking up, checking out regularly, and around a framework of what you are specifically going to keep, develop, let go. That's it. So there you go. You've got the coaching model, but the underlying science of this is fascinating. So a few years ago, I was very fortunate enough to take a sabbatical and go to Cambridge for a year, Cambridge University, and to put my theories into practice. And in my master, I did a master's degree. I've written a number of books, co-written books. I prefer to co-write. So I've co-written a book with Emma Kilby and Christina Bill, based upon this coaching model and the levels of human existence, graves. And it's basically 101 days, thoughts for the day, but it's a strategies for change. And I was fortunate to have a supervising professor, Professor Hilary Cramin, who's written this very excellent book, Positive Peace in Schools, with a colleague, Dr. Terence Bevington. And after my research and after on the role of transformational leadership, and I interviewed 5 leaders on how they'd made an impact on the world. And one of them was Meg Wheatley, and to ask them how they would articulate their vision, their goals. How do people who really make change in society articulate the concept of the unseen through dialogue? And that's fascinating. And I also interviewed Ian Gilbert, who's been a great friend and colleague, who's been working in education to make a difference. And we've been working together for 30 years. And there was a common factors. Anyway, out of that, myself and Hilary, created this Positive Peace Matrix, which is an integration of both of our work. And still rooted in peacekeeping, making, building. That's our point of contact. And focusing for this as a framework for schools, particularly for Hilary, but for business and society as well for me. So looking at peacekeeping as preservation, peacemaking as restoration, peace building as growth and change, and inner peace, well-being, outer peace relationships, community and global peace, citizenship, and ecological peace, cosmos. So this is where Tien ties three realms: inner peace, self; outer peace, others; community, global peace, and ecological peace is obviously the environment. And when we work with communities, and this is particularly designed for schools, but it's also applicable to businesses and communities, we look at what this actually looks like on the ground. So we've created a profiling tool for anyone in the schools and businesses to get everyone's input, whether or not you're a 4-year-old or a 40-year-old. How are you experiencing inner peace, outer peace, community, global peace, ecological peace, in its interconnection between peacekeeping, making, and building? Again, I'm not going to unpack any of these in any great detail. This is just us introducing the peace matrix to you. But the peacekeeping is a simple process. Peacemaking is complicated. So addressing inner conflicts, resolving conflicts, addressing conflicts in communities, and starting to work on rewilding projects in reconnecting with nature for the ecological piece. And then peace building, which is about preparation for transformation and building capacity and learning and developing healthy relationships, understanding how to reflect, reaching across the communities in the world, reflecting and articulating values, and ecological peace. And I have a particular passion for ecological peace, learning to care for the planet and to be in love with life. And I just need to clarify that very briefly. But in love isn't a romantic love, it's a state. It's called biophilia, biophilic. And please have a look at the work of the Da Vinci Life School. We've been advising in terms of the curriculum of biophilic. And so when we work with leaders in schools and businesses, we explore the relationship with the planet and about going beyond the Anthropocene, the time that humanity has been on the planet, and honouring the more than human. And this isn't tree hugging. I have to be really clear here. For the hyper-rational individual, the moment that we introduce the word love and honouring them, if you're one of those people going, oh, now he's gone off on one. This is an absolute science. This is an absolute reality. And when you can understand profoundly the relationship with the seen and the unseen aspect of nature, then we create leaders who don't just create profit for their organisation or outcomes for their school. We create leaders who can have a contribution on the communities and planets long after they have left. And that is where the whole issue of time comes in. Again, I'm not going to go through the strand of time, but some people are focused on the past, some are focused on the present. But peace building is about focusing on the future. So, to conclude, we use theatre. I particularly use a technique known as theatre of the oppressed, which is set up by Augusto Boal, a Brazilian influenced by his great friend and colleague Paulo Freire, whose fantastic book Pedagogy of the Oppressed is an absolute classic. But Boal says theatre is not revolutionary, it's a rehearsal for the revolution. And this revolution isn't necessarily a societal revolution, it's a revolution of the self. It's what am I doing? How can I engage in the conscious transformation and transcendence of self? And that's really what the programs are about. And for that, we use a creative process, storytelling. And for those of you who know the work of Joseph Campbell, this is a condensation of his stages of the story, where the hero has a call to adventure. They accept the call, they cross the threshold, and he goes through the path of trials, and they return with the elixir. And again, it's really down to the audience that we're in and which doorway we come through with our colleagues, whether or not we start with the storytelling, which is our preference, or we go through the values, or we go through the intellectual, or we go through the emotional. And those are the four doorways of that we need to be human. We are intellectual, emotional, practical, and intuitive spiritual beings. So the second thing that Hila and I did as a tool is to rethink the restorative justice social discipline window and how we can use this within our work. And again, this is common, particularly in schools and businesses who want to create restorative approaches. Low control, low support is not, it's neglectful, it's irresponsible. High control, low support is done too, punitive, authoritarian, and high support but low control is done for, it's permissive, it's paternalistic. And ideally, we have high control, high support, which is done with, which is authoritative and restorative. However, this will support the peacekeeping and the peacemaking, but for peace building, we need to move to the next iteration of the restorative justice window. So what we've done, we've introduced the idea of the 5 conflict styles, which are more of a business model to collaborate, accommodate, avoid, and compete. And that is about compromise. And we think from a more complex, you've got to be able to do all 4 of those based on who you're with, where you are, and what you're doing. So this is the restorative justice window next iteration, and this is looking at the peace archetypes. And these are leadership archetypes as well. So if you're able to be centered and balanced, this is wisdom-based. And this goes right back to the idea from Daisaku Ikeda in terms of creating wisdom-based education. And that is the role of the peace builder. So if you're a peace builder, you are wise, you work at a level of complexity, and you know when to collaborate and become the peacemaker. You know when to facilitate and to accommodate people. You know when to become a peacekeeper and when to avoid. And you know when to be a warrior, when to fight for something. Now, from a values point of view, this is great. However, our values can be creative or they can become excessive. And if they become super excessive, they can become destructive. So the peacemaker who wants to help everyone to collaborate can easily become the savior. The facilitator, good at organizing things, accommodation, they can become the servant. And the peacekeeper can become the bystander. They just don't like conflict, so they avoid it to such an extent they just observe it with doing nothing from it. And then the warrior that fights for peace, to be competitive, can sadly become the dictator. They can become the very person they seek. So when we've created a profiling tool for this, and when we do the individuals, when we do the weekends retreats, and when we do the coaching, we use this as a framework for our coaching, and we usually have a primary and secondary drive, which is interesting because you can be a warrior at work and a servant at home. Let's finish off with, how do we move from these levels of peacekeeping, making and building? How do we move for a level of maturity? And this is, to the left is a photograph of some students we've been working with. They must be in their 20s now. This is their first week at school, and they make a simple, what's known as a learning line, to show the stages of change, again through play and pictures. And this is a quote again from Hilary and colleague Alexandra. Those involved with the education of others should become fully aware of all expressions of violence and peace in order to offer an education that is fit for purpose for the 21st century. So the education of others doesn't just mean a school education, it means a constant having a learning organisation, and the education and the role of the leader is to educate and support other people's development, their somatic skills, their intellectual skills, as Galtung says, and in order for them to educate others, the leader has to be in a constant state of self-development. And that's the difference between having a manager who can do the rules and the structures, but a leader is actively engaged in their own transformation. So simply, this is about moving from knowing to doing to being. And from a psychological point of view, this is a very old model. We move from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. So during this short presentation, hopefully you'll see that I've introduced the idea of peace, peacekeeping, making and building, and the various elements. So what you didn't know at the beginning, you're now consciously incompetent. You now may see what you don't know, which is fine, because by going on the programs, the workshops, the training days, the weekend retreats, we will help you move through the process of taking the theory and putting it into action. And that requires support. And to get to a point whereby you are unconsciously incompetent. You are, it's just a habit. And that usually takes a very short space of time if the foundations are in place, and if you're able to move from this point. Now, one of the dangers of overly academic, whilst it's extraordinarily creative, and I've really enjoyed my time at Cambridge, if it's excessively academic, it doesn't move into action. And having a theory of peace education and having the theory of positive peace is one thing, but as a human being, the individual human being, and in academic circles this is known as a self as resource. The individual scholar is transformed through their scholarship work. But if you're not willing to be transformed, or you want to be a dispassionate observer of the process, data capturing and report writing, but not actually living it, it has little value, I think. So the thing that blocks us is fear. An acronym, again, just to finish on another acronym, I love an acronym. Fear stands for false expectations appearing real. And the thing that stops us moving from peacekeeping and peace making into peace building is fear of the chaotic, it's a fear of the unknown. It's also, most of us can get through peacekeeping and peacemaking by focusing on the rational. And you can't really engage in the transformation unless you are able to balance the rational and the transrational. And that is why peace building is a role for leadership, not just not a role for people who can manage it or understand it theoretically. And there's a quote from the Buddha, just to finish up, one quote from the East and the West. And the Buddha says, if you know but you do not do, you do not know. And you can have all the theory in the world, you can write extraordinary, wonderful academic papers and books and scholarship, but if you yourself are not actively engaged in the process of peace building you're not a peace builder, you're an observer of it. And this is a challenge for us, is to move from the theory to the practice. So I'll finish with this quote from the artist scholar himself. He's Albert Einstein with a violin. He would play music and get all whimsical when he was pondering where we are in the universe. And Albert Einstein said, the rational mind is a loyal servant, and the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And we have become a society that honours a servant, but has forgotten the gift. And if you are interested in taking this a little bit further, if you'd like to find out a bit more about our keynotes, training days and workshops, or you'd like to explore the profiling, to look at the 24-hour retreats and the leadership and team coaching, or if you want to work with us to support 3 months change program, whether or not your business, school or a community, please contact us at undiscoveredcountry.org.uk or email the wonderful Phoebe at admin@undiscoveredcountry.org.uk or call us on our VoIP line 0330 034 1664. Thank you very much.